When you step back, something powerful begins to happen that most people never understand. The moment you stop chasing explaining or trying to fix how she feels, the emotional dynamic shifts completely. Distance doesn't weaken attraction the way fear tells you it will. In reality, distance is what activates emotional memory. When you were constantly present, her mind was focused on managing the relationship, reacting to you, or protecting her own emotional space. But when you remove yourself calmly without anger or drama, you remove the pressure that kept her emotions blocked. At first, she may feel relief, and that's important to understand. Relief simply means the tension is gone. There are no messages to respond. There are no messages to respond to, no expectations to meet, no emotional weight pressing on her every day. Her logical mind finally relaxes. And when logic relaxes, emotion takes the lead. This is where the shifting. Once the noise disappears, the mind naturally looks backward. Without new conversations, new arguments, or new emotional input, her brain starts filling the silence with memories. Not neutral memories, emotional moments when she felt desired, safe, playful, connected, moments when being around you made her feel something real. This happens because the human mind is wired to seek emotional stimulation. When the present becomes quiet, distance also removes your availability, and availability kills mystery. When she knew you were always there, your value was assumed, but when you're gone, your presence is no longer guaranteed. That uncertainty pulls attention inward. She starts wondering what you're doing, how you're feeling, and why you're not chasing like she expected. And in that wondering, memories resurface. Not because she planned it, but because emotion doesn't need permission to speak. What most people get wrong is thinking they need to remind someone of their value. They think sending one more message, explaining their intentions, or asking for closure will help. It doesn't. Every extra word keeps her focused on the present version of you, the one seeking reassurance. Distance erases that version and preserves the emotional version she was once drawn to, the calm, grounded, self respecting you who didn't need validation to feel whole. Silence creates contrast. When you're gone, she feels the difference between a life with your energy and a life without it. And that contrast sharpens memory. Ordinary moments suddenly feel special in hindsight. Conversations that once felt normal now feel meaningful. A lot of that passed quickly now replays slowly. This is why absence doesn't make her forget, it makes her reflect. And the more you hold your ground, the more emotional weight those memories gain. Not because you demanded attention, but because you gave her space to feel, you let her emotional world breathe, you let curiosity replace certainty. And certainty is comfort, but curiosity is attraction. This is why walking away peacefully is not a loss of power. It's the moment your emotional imprint becomes permanent. You stop trying to control how she feels, and in doing so, you allow her feelings to surface on their own. And when emotions surface without pressure, they don't fade quickly, they linger. Sometimes she reaches out, sometimes she doesn't. But either way, the shift has already happened. The memories are alive now, and they exist because you chose distance over desperation. That is how emotional memory is activated, and that is where your power truly begins. When you walk away with calm and self respect, you do something most people never realize they're doing. You preserve the version of yourself that she fell for in the first place. Attraction isn't built on words or promises, it's built on emotional impressions. And the last emotional impression you leave behind matters more than everything you said before it. When you choose dignity over drama, you freeze her memory of you at your strongest point. Think about how people remember others after things end. They don't remember every detail, they remember the feeling. If you stay and argue, if you plit, explain, or try to negotiate your value, you overwrite the emotional image she once had of you. You replace confidence with neediness, mystery with predictability, strength with emotional dependence. But when you walk away peacefully, you protect the image that created attraction in the first place. This is where most men lose ground without realizing it. They believe closure comes from talking everything out. They think being understood will bring respect. But emotional attraction doesn't respond to explanations, it responds to behavior. Silence paired with self control communicates more than any speech ever could. It tells her you respect yourself enough not to chase someone who is unsure. That message sinks in slowly and it sinks in deep. When she looks back, she doesn't remember you as the man who tried to convince her. She remembers you as the man who knew when to step away. That memory carries weight, it creates curiosity. It creates comparison because every future interaction she has with someone else will unconsciously be measured against the emotional standard you set. Not the words you used, but the way you carried yourself when things became uncertain. Walking away without bitterness also removes guilt from the equation. If you explode emotionally or accuse her, she justifies pushing you away. But when you leave with grace, there's nothing for her to blame, no villain to point to. That forces introspection. And introspection is dangerous in the best way because it turns her attention inward. She starts questioning whether she lost something valuable rather than escaping something difficult. There's also power in leaving things unresolved. When everything is explained, the mind moves on. When something ends quietly, the mind loops. She replays conversations. She wonders what you were thinking. She questions whether she misjudged you. That open emotional loop keeps your presence alive long after you're physically gone. Most importantly, walking away preserves your identity. You don't shrink yourself to be chosen. You don't compromise your boundaries for temporary reassurance. You show, coach, through action that your life continues with or without her approval. That independence is what first attracted her, and it's what keeps you relevant in her emotional memory. Over time, the version of you that remains in her mind becomes idealized. Not because you were perfect, but because you didn't stay long enough to ruin the fantasy. You didn't give her a reason to see you as weak or resentful. You left her with respect, and respect fuels attraction more than affection ever could. Whether she reaches out again or not is secondary. The real victory is that you never lost yourself trying to hold on to someone else. And when someone pulls memories close, they do it because those memories represent strength, calm, and self worth. That's the version of you she remembers. That's the version that never fades. When communication stops, something subtle but powerful begins to work in your favor. Silence doesn't feel productive at first because we're conditioned to believe that staying connected keeps us relevant. But emotionally, the opposite is often true. Silence removes the constant stream of new information that keeps feelings neutral and ordinary. When there are no new messages, no explanations, and no emotional updates, the mind has no choice but to turn inward. And when it does, it doesn't replay average moments, it replays the emotional highs. This is how ordinary moments turn into emotional highlights. While you were present, shared experiences blended into daily life. They were enjoyed, but they weren't analyzed. Familiarity softened their impact. Silence changes that. Without ongoing interaction, those same moments are no longer competing with the present. They stand alone, isolated, and that isolation gives them weight. Laughter that once passed quickly now feels meaningful. Comfort that felt routine now feels rare. The absence adds intensity to what once felt normal. The brain doesn't miss people, it misses feelings, and silence removes distractions, allowing those feelings to resurface. A random song, a quiet night, or an empty moment triggers a memory because your energy is no longer there to replace it. When you were present, she could create new emotional input with you. When you're gone, the mind searches for stimulation and it finds it in the past. That's when memories stop being background noise and start becoming emotional experiences again. Silence also creates space for imagination. When you don't explain yourself or narrate your life, her mind fills in the blanks. She wonders how you're doing, whether you've moved on, and what your absence means. That uncertainty is not uncomfortable for her emotions, it's stimulating. Mystery reintroduces attraction because attraction thrives on the unknown. The less she knows, the more her mind engages. Another mistake people make is believing they need to stay friendly or available to stay memorable. But availability lowers emotional impact. When someone is always accessible, their presence becomes predictable. Silence disrupts that pattern. It creates contrast. Your absence becomes noticeable, and what is noticeable becomes meaningful. That meaning attaches itself to memory. Silence also prevents emotional damage. Every unnecessary conversation risks turning attraction into irritation or emotional exhaustion. By saying nothing, you protect the emotional charge of what already exists. You allow positive memories to stay uncontaminated by tension, frustration, or forced conversation. This is why restraint is so powerful. It keeps the emotional image clean. Over time, silence does something even deeper. It shifts her emotional narrative. Instead of remembering how things ended, she starts remembering how things felt. The ending fades, the feeling remains. That's because emotions don't store timelines the way logic does, they store intensity. And silence increases intensity by removing repetition. This is why trying to stay relevant through constant communication backfires. It replaces longing with familiarity. Silence does the opposite. It creates space for longing to grow. Not longing for attention, but longing for connection. And connection is always tied to memory. You're not disappearing when you go silent. You're allowing your emotional imprint to speak without interference. You're giving her the space to feel rather than react. And feelings that rise naturally, without pressure, have a way of staying alive much longer. Silence doesn't beg to be remembered. It allows memories to do the work on their own. When she pushes you away, it's easy to believe that her decision is final, emotional, and deeply personal. But in most cases, that push doesn't come from a lack of feeling. It comes from a need for control, certainty, or emotional safety. At that moment, her ego is in charge. The ego wants predictability. It wants to know where it stands. It wants reassurance that it can pull away without losing anything valuable. So she creates distance, sets boundaries, or cools off, believing that this will bring her peace. At first, it does. The ego feels relief when it regains control. But ego and emotion operate on different timelines. The ego reacts quickly. Emotion moves slowly and quietly. Once the control is established and the tension fades, emotion begins to surface. And emotion doesn't care about decisions made in moments of certainty. It cares about how something felt. This is where the shift begins. When you don't resist or push, when you don't argue or chase, you remove the resistance her ego expected. She anticipated pursuit, she expected reassurance, she was prepared to manage your reaction. But when none of that happens, the ego loses its reference point. Control feels incomplete, And into that gap, emotion steps in. Her emotions begin to ask questions her ego avoided. What did I really feel with him? Why does his absence feel heavier than I expected? Why isn't he trying to pull me back? These questions aren't logical, they're emotional, and emotions pull on memory for answers. She starts revisiting moments that made her feel connected, seen, and alive, not because she wants to change her mind, but because her emotional world is no longer distracted. Ego pushes people away to protect itself. Emotion pulls memories close to reconnect with feeling. The two are always in tension. When you stay calm and grounded, you don't feed the ego battle. When you don't try to prove anything, that neutrality is powerful because it leaves her alone with her emotional truth. There's also an important shift in perception that happens here. When she realizes you respected her decision without collapsing, her view of you changes. You're no longer the one seeking approval. You become the one who accepted reality with strength. That reframes the entire dynamic. Instead of feeling chased, she feels the absence of your energy, and absence is felt emotionally, not logically. As time passes, the ego no longer needs to defend itself. There's no pressure coming from you, no emotional tug-off war. That's when emotions have the space to breathe. And emotions, once given space, often grow stronger instead of weaker. They begin to pull memories closer because memories represent safety without vulnerability. She can feel without risking rejection. This is why so many reconnections happen after silence. Not during conflict. Conflict feeds the ego, silence feeds emotion. When you stop engaging at the ego level, you allow emotional curiosity to rise naturally. She begins to wonder not because she's uncertain, but because something meaningful is no longer present. Whether she acts on those emotions or not is out of your control. But the shift itself is the point. You didn't lose power when she pushed you away, you gained it by not resisting. You let her ego have its moment, and you trusted that emotion would eventually speak. And when emotions speak without interference, they don't shout, they pull. When you stop chasing, explaining, or trying to stay visible, something important becomes clear without you ever having to say a word. Your absence creates scarcity, and scarcity reveals value. Not imagined value, not forced value, but real value that can only be felt when something is no longer easily accessible. When you were always available, your presence blended into her emotional environment. It was there, but it wasn't felt. Scarcity changes that completely. Most people believe value is proven through effort. They think showing how much they care, how consistent they are, or how willing they are to stay will make someone appreciate them more. Emotionally, the opposite happens. Effort without boundaries lowers perceived value because it removes consequence. Scarcity reintroduces consequence. It tells her, without confrontation or explanation, that your time, energy, and presence are not unlimited. When you disappear calmly, her mind starts to reevaluate, not in a dramatic way at first, but subtly. She notices the gap, the missing messages. The lack of emotional availability, that gap creates contrast, and contrast sharpens awareness. She begins to feel what your presence actually added to her life because it's no longer there to be taken for granted. Scarcity also forces honesty. When someone believes they can return at any time, they don't feel urgency. But when access is removed, the emotional clock starts ticking. She begins to ask herself whether losing you is acceptable or whether she miscalculated your importance. That question carries emotional weight because it comes with the possibility of permanence. The power of scarcity is that it works silently. You're not demanding appreciation, you're not setting ultimatums. You're simply living your life without waiting to be chosen. That independence communicates self-worth at a level words can't reach. It says you value yourself enough not to linger in uncertainty. And self-valuation is contagious. When you value yourself, others are forced to reassess how they value you. Scarcity also prevents emotional dilution. When someone is always around, their impact spreads thin. When they're gone, their emotional imprint concentrates. Memories feel heavier. Moments feel more significant. The absence compresses emotion to something more intense and focused. This is why past experiences suddenly feel more meaningful when they might be gone forever. Another important shift happens here. Scarcity removes the safety net of assumption. She can no longer assume you'll be there later. She can no longer delay emotional decisions without cost. That doesn't create pressure, it creates clarity, and clarity often brings respect, even if it brings it quietly. This is also where many people make the mistake of reappearing too soon. They break scarcity by checking in, sending casual messages, or just seeing how things are. That resets the emotional clock. It restores availability and removes the weight that scarcity created. Holding your ground isn't about punishment, it's about consistency. Consistency is what makes value believable. Over time, scarcity transforms how she remembers you. You're no longer associated with persistence or emotional effort. You're associated with boundaries, strength, and self-respect. That association elevates your place in her emotional world, whether she acts on it or not. You don't need to convince someone of your worth. When you stop offering unlimited access, your worth becomes obvious. And when value becomes clear without words, it leaves a deeper and more lasting impression. There's a quiet moment that changes everything, and it's the moment you genuinely let go. Not the kind of letting go that's done to get a reaction, not the strategic silence meant to pull someone back, but the real internal release where you stop needing an outcome. That moment is powerful because it shifts your energy completely. And ironically, it's also the moment when reconnection becomes possible. When you're holding on emotionally, even in silence, There's tension underneath it, hope mixed with fear. That energy leaks out in subtle ways: hesitation, overthinking, emotional readiness. Letting go removes that tension. You're no longer waiting to be chosen, you're choosing yourself. And that shift changes how you exist in her emotional world, even from a distance. Letting go doesn't erase what happened between you, it reframes it. Instead of the connection being associated with pressure, uncertainty, or emotional struggle, it becomes associated with freedom. Freedom for you and freedom for her. And freedom is emotionally attractive because it feels safe. When someone doesn't need you, their presence feels lighter, more genuine, more real. This is where many people misunderstand power. They think power comes from control or emotional leverage. Real power comes from non attachment. When you're no longer trying to pull her back, there's nothing to resist, no emotional tug of war. No silent battle. And without resistance, emotion flows more naturally. Her feelings don't have to defend themselves anymore. Letting go also gives her emotional permission to feel. When someone senses they're being waited on, their emotions tighten. They feel watched, evaluated, expected. But when that pressure disappears, emotions can rise without obligation. She can think about you without feeling responsible for your feelings. She can miss you without feeling guilty. That's when memories return freely, not as a reaction, but as a choice. Another important shift happens within you. When you let go, you stop defining your worth through her response. You reclaim your center. Your life begins to expand again. Your focus moves forward instead of backward. That forward momentum is subtle, but it's felt. Even at a distance, people sense when someone has emotionally moved on, and paradoxically, emotional movement forward is what often pulls others back. If she does reach out, the dynamic is completely different now. There's no desperation on your side, no urgency, no need to prove anything. You're responding from wholeness, not lack. That changes the tone of everything. Reconnection, if it happens because it's chosen, not because it's chased. And if she doesn't return, letting go still wins because you didn't pause your life waiting for validation. You didn't anchor your peace to someone else's decision. You walked away intact, stronger, more grounded. That's not loss. That's alignment. This is the paradox most people never grasp. The tighter you hold, the further things drift. The moment you release, space opens. And in that space, anything becomes possible: reconnection, closure, or something better entirely. You don't let go to get her back. You let go to get yourself back. And from that place, whatever returns does so for the right reasons.